family. We give you thanks for the freedom and responsibility we exercise in this land through the democratic process. We lift up all duly elected leaders and public servants, especially Tony Moore, who takes a seat as a Member of Parliament. Bless our Governor General, all the citizens and residents of this nation. Give us perseverance to press on through discouragement and gratitude with humility to acknowledge you in any success. For you have been the people's guide for past 300 years. With you still on the people's side, we have no doubts or fears. We begin with prayer to remind us there is no situation in which you cannot help us, and no time in which we don't need your help. So let us pray together as Jesus has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks. This house is now in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, October 27th, 2020 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be taken as read.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker.
I am to announce that the Clerk of Parliament has received from the Cabinet Secretary a notice dated November 16, 2020, and it reads as follows. I am to inform you that on Thursday, the 12th of November 2020, Her Excellency the Governor General received from the returning officer for the constituency of St. George North the writ which has been issued for a by-election in that constituency, certifying the election in the poll held on Wednesday, the 11th of November 2020, of Miss Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore to serve as a member of the House of Assembly for the said constituency of St. George North. The oath of allegiance required by Section 59 of the Constitution and Section 62 of the Representation of the People Act, Chapter 12, was taken by Ms. Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore on Monday, 16th November 2020, before His Excellency, the Acting Governor General. Yours faithfully, Cecile Humphrey, Cabinet Secretary. I am also to announce that Miss Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore of 117 Woodburn Park in the parish of St. Philip in this island did sign the Declaration of Qualification and did swear the oath of allegiance as is required for a member to sit in this honorable house. I now therefore invite her to take her seat in this honorable chamber. Could you kindly stand, Ms. Moore? Tony Nicole Sharian Moore, it is my duty and my pleasure to welcome you to this Honorable House of Assembly. I am sure that you have gained some experience from the other place, but in this chamber, there are lots of rules and lots of pitfalls. I hope that you will take great care in learning the proceedings of this House, and I hope that you will contribute to the debates generally that take place in this chamber. Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my comments this morning are brief but full of warmth and emotion. For us on this side, this represents a number of things. First and foremost, we are happy to welcome the Honourable Member for St. George North. I feel very good saying that, to this Honourable Chamber. And I trust and pray that her representation of the people of St. George North will cause the confidence in her to have them return her over and over and over and over to this honorable chamber. I am equally very, very humbled but happy that this election of the honorable member for St. George North represents the reunification of two entities that have not been together for 65 years in terms of working together. And I refer specifically to the fact that the honorable member is the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. Her predecessors would have served in every instance on both sides of this honorable chamber, and we therefore welcome her once again. We welcome her as the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union to the parliamentary party of the Barbados Labour Party. We are conscious that there will be moments when her duty to the labour movement will take preeminence over anything else. And I start this session by making that point very clear. That is what we expect of her. That is what we require. We believe that the public requires of her. And her decision to work with us is one that is rooted in the same philosophical concerns and beliefs, but it is equally one that we recognize that requires her to be steadfast as the resolution of 1971 of the same Barbados Workers Union would have reflected when the then General Secretary was assuming a position on a party that is not represented in this honorable chamber today, but is still very much represented in the body politic of this country, and I refer specifically to the Democratic Labour Party. So with those few words, I welcome the honourable member for St. George North. I look forward to robust debate from her. I look forward to her helping us to carry the heavy lifting that we now as a country face, and I am very confident that the people of St. George North will be happy with her performance anytime they are required to ask again what is their view and how shall they vote. I believe that her work over the course of whatever period of time is left in this term shall commend her to them once more. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honorable member for St. George North. I apologize. Honorable member for St. Michael West. Please turn on your mic.
Thank you, sir. There are about 80-something of us on this side. who I would also like to join in expression of welcome to the newest member to this chamber, the honorable member for St. George North. And certainly, personally, I would like to offer, again in this public space, congratulations to her Must indeed be a memorable occasion for herself and husband and family. And long may that memory live and last with her. I can't say I recall my first moments of sitting in this chamber. I was reflecting on that when the honorable member entered. I don't even remember where I sat. I remember with whom I sat then, but I don't actually remember where I sat. Certainly, these circumstances today would be memorable for her. What I do recall of my own experience is that, more importantly than where I sat, was the sense of purpose with which I sat then. It's a sense of purpose with which and in which I'm still sustained today. And my prayer for the honorable member would be that that would be her experience. The purpose with which she strode into this chamber today would long live with her, and that she would valiantly serve that purpose. Political platforms give the opportunity for all kinds of statements, some memorable and some better forgotten, and some wholesome and some not so wholesome. And I say publicly what I've said to the honorable member privately, that ultimately judgment is not established in the critiquing tongues, especially of opponents or even of supporters. It is found more so in the manner in which you conduct yourself as you seek to serve. And I'm sure you will find and fulfill the proper way in doing so. And ultimately, it is to be found in the courts of heaven. And I'm sure the honorable member understands that. So as you seek to serve, I will advise you today in this public space. And I will not say stay the course. That might be a little bit of misguidance. But I'll say, I'll say to you, stay focused and keep the faith as you pursue the battle. Thank you.
Honourable member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I address you in the good name of the people of St. George North. I also address you in the name of workers of Barbados and their families. It is indeed a proud moment as I stand here with the confidence and in the confidence given to me by the people of St. George North to speak on their behalf, yet to speak more widely as the voice of working class people and their families at a time in our development where that voice is very much needed. I reflect this morning that it was about 26 years ago that Labour had such an opportunity to be in the House of Assembly. Perhaps some may argue that it was by choice that Labour left the House of Assembly, but it is easily recognized what was driving the choice at that time, and it is very instructive that the same reasons that caused Labour to leave are the very reasons that have invited Labour back. That is the need for Labour to have a voice, the need for that voice to be heard as we seek to uplift our people at a time that is very critical in our history, a crisis period. Our growth path will not only benefit or must not only see Labour reduced to being calculators of severance payments, which has been something that is easily observed for the past few months. Our growth path demands that Labour has voice and that that voice is fully expressed in the decision-making of this House, this chamber, and other places. I'm so proud, therefore, to stand here, Mr. Speaker, committing to continue working with you. You, Mr. Speaker, have worked with me very well over the past 6 weeks. and I look forward to working with you and others as we commit to putting Barbados first. Putting Barbados first rejects as a norm that resources must be used just to uplift a few. Putting Barbados first requires that resources, our brain resources, our financial resources, our social resources are put to best use for the upliftment of our people. So yes, at a time when a crisis has highlighted a number of cracks in our system, I stand here honored today and see it as a tremendous responsibility that not only I myself have, but that all honorable members in this House have, to avoid the temptation, as the honorable leader of the opposition said, to ignore the critics, because we must be ever mindful of the critics, because it's in listening and deciding that we will not push dissenting voices in the background that we are ever conscious of the mandate and the commitment that we have and the work that we have to do within this honorable House. Instead, honorable leader of the opposition, it will be used as an opportunity, my experience and my time here, to convert those who are willing to be converted to that better way, including the honorable member. So my call, therefore, in these few words this morning is for us to remain focused as we go about the business of the people who've put us here. And while joining you this morning in this honorable House increases the spotlight on all of us, I am sure that we are committed to that responsibility of upholding our democracy, our justice, and the social engineering that is required at this time. So I thank you all. I thank you for your warm welcome. I take this opportunity also to thank those members of my family who are representative of that extended family that rallied behind me and who have journeyed with me from a baby even up onto this point. I thank my union family as well for the support that they have given. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to let emotions overtake this morning. So with these few words, I am obliged.
Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General.
10th of November 2020, reference number GG 2S1A Volume 2. Dear Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to inform that I shall be away from office during the period 14th to 21st November 2020 on vacation leave. In accordance with the provisions of Section 29, Subsection 1, Subsection A of the Constitution, Sir Kenneth Rudolph Hewitt, KACBE, BJH, will perform the functions of the Office of Governor General during my absence. As the Honourable the House of Assembly will not be meeting prior to the start of my vacation leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal messages to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honourable the House of Assembly when next it meets? I have the honor to be yours faithfully, Governor General.
Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of...
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Mr. Speaker, we now turn to appointment of the election of the Deputy Speaker.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure all are aware of the vacancy that has been created with the position of Deputy Speaker by the election of the Honourable Member for St. George North. And as a consequence, I beg to move that the position be filled by the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest.
I'd like to second that.
The question is that the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest be elected as Deputy Speaker. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The honourable member for the constituency of St. Michael Northwest is elected as the Deputy Speaker.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 2. In the name of the Honourable Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 228, the compulsory acquisition by the Crown of parcels of land situate at Gemswick in the parish of St. Philip in this island, owned by Balmoral Investment Limited and leased to Grantley Adams International Airport, Inc. for the public purpose, namely in public safety and national security.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by saying that this is the area well known to us all called Rock Hall. An area, Mr. Speaker, that has had a significant settlement of, let me call those without title, for some time. And prior to that, it was used many years ago as a landfill. And what has happened over the years is after that landfill was no longer in use as a landfill, people started to put up houses on that land. There are almost 200 and something odd houses there, and clearly this is unacceptable to have that number of people living on what was a landfill. It is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, for several reasons. The first reason it's unacceptable is because of the health problems associated. Now, a landfill will give off for many, many years after it is not used as a landfill a gas called methane. And methane has significant health problems associated with it. And I'm going to refer, and I'll make this a document of the House, the dangers of methane gas poisoning and exposure to methane. Methane, Mr. Speaker, can cause things like rapid breathing, increased heart rate, clumsiness, dizziness, decreased vision, euphoria, decreased alertness, loss of memory, weakness, fatigue, emotional responses, nausea, vomiting, fainting, collapse, convulsions, coma, and death. So, but that is just one gas that a landfill gives off. In addition to methane, a landfill will also give off hydrogen sulfide, which is another gas that comes from the degradation of the garbage over the years. That also has significant health problems to people who may be living or residing or inhale hydrogen sulfide over long periods of time. And it gives off another gas called radon. Radon, a third gas, Mr. Speaker, that has significant health problems, is linked to leukemia, is linked to prostate cancer, is linked to microcytic anemia, is linked to other forms of megalocytic leukemias, and significant problems. That is from the health point of view. Adjacent to this area is as well an old area that was also used as a dump that has significant particulate matter. And that can also give rise to inhalation problems and lung problems. Health problems, even if we assume or consider nothing else, there is absolutely no reason that hundreds of people should be living on top of a landfill. Let us then look at the fact that this landfill is the proximity of it to the Grantley Adams International Airport. Second reason why it should not be there. Should you have a fire at that site, Mr. Speaker, it means all of the smoke, all of the dislocation, all of the security problems associated with being adjacent to the Grantley Adams International Airport. You imagine if you have a fire there and the wind blows from the east all the way to the west, you have to close down the runway because it would be full of smoke. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the methane not only being a risk to your health, but it itself is a combustible gas and risks of explosion. When I met with the fire officer, Mr. Speaker, the fire officer told me that is a disaster waiting to happen. It is a significant problem that we have to address. That's the second reason that we have to relocate people from the landfill. The third reason that we have to relocate people from that landfill, Mr. Speaker, is not only from the point of view of the health of them, not only from the point of view of the security risks and explosion, but in addition to that, the fact that the landfill was filled just on soil, it means that the structures themselves are at risk of falling in to the landfill in areas where the soil has not been properly compacted, not proper foundations in the area. The whole structure themselves are at risk. The foundations are poor. Risk to life and limb to the people of that area. So when we as a government assessed all of those problems, assessed the problems associated with the radar and the pilots saying that they have difficulties sometimes with their radar coming onto the runway, assess the risk of if there's an issue with a plane overshooting the runway because it's right at the end of the runway. All of these things coming together, Mr. Speaker, the government has made an absolute and conscious decision, knowing full well that we have to protect our people, knowing full well that we have to protect our installations, knowing full well that we have a duty and a responsibility to keep our people safe. We have no choice other than to relocate the people who live on that landfill. And part of that relocation process requires us to acquire the land currently owned by Balmoral Investments. And that is why we are here today, Mr. Speaker. So we are going through the process. We have done everything required for the land acquisition, and we are asking for the support of this House bearing in mind all of the problems associated, bearing in mind all of the risks associated, bearing in mind that we have to protect our people, that we acquire this land and relocate these residents as a matter of urgency. You know, Mr. Speaker, when I contemplated this, I asked myself, if we had a fire there and just one person died, what is the value of one person's life? What is the value of one person becoming ill because of inhalation of gases? What is the cost of staying in hospital for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months if you have burn injuries or cancer or whatever? The cost, the Minister of Health will tell you, is about $30,000 per month per person. Per person. Can we as a government sustain that for hundreds of people? And how does that then displace the other person that needs acute medical attention as well? So we as a government must do everything to mitigate risks and to reduce expenses and to understand and look to the future and see how we can mitigate the problems that may come with these kinds of settlements. So I ask, Mr. Speaker, bearing all of those risks, bearing all of the health issues, bearing all of the security issues, bearing all of the risks to our installations and our institutions, having concept and ideas that every single life matters and every single life is important and that we cannot put a price on one life. That person that lost their life, if a tragedy happened, could have been the next Rihanna, could have been the next person inventing something to take Barbados to the international scale. And let me make it clear, those that inhale methane and radon are more at risk are the children that live there. So we have a duty and we have a responsibility. And I could not imagine with any conscience that any person in this house could be against the acquisition of this land and the relocation of those people to someplace better. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged and ask that this matter do now pass.
I'd like to second that.
Honourable Mr. Michael West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The power of acquisition given to a government in our context is an awesome power. It is a power which justifiably, over the years, around which some people have developed a measure, a sense of fear, a little bit of trepidation, especially when there has been some speculation that their properties may be acquired for whatever purpose. I say that to say this. I believe that any government has a responsibility to do whatever is required to make citizens and residents as comfortable as possible in their own space. And over the years, we have had instances where the Acquisition Act has been used, and in the minds of many, to the detriment of those who have been subject to such acquisition. So that power is an awesome one. I say so simply to encourage the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, the Honourable Minister now responsible for housing, to do his very best to ensure that when this power has to be executed in the interests of public, that the actions of the government are such that people are left in no doubt as to the fact that land and property is being acquired for good public purpose, and that there's no other motivating factor driving such an action. Akin to that reality, the abuse of that power from time to time, even if only in the minds of many or in the minds of some, is the issue of compensation for properties acquired by the state for public interest. And the stories have been myriad, one or two of them legend, as to how government has taken excessively long periods of time to compensate people relative to acquisition of their properties, even though some of these matters have been settled at the level of the court. As a legal person, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you're well aware of these happenings. That action is taken in the interest of John Public. The courts make the rulings. Action should ensue in the interest of those who are complaining. Compensation should be made. And the years roll by, and that compensation is not given. Minister of Housing must see it as his responsibility to persuade his colleagues in finance that the decisions of this court must be respected, and the rights of citizens must be highly regarded, and that compensation should be given in suitably appropriate timeframes, such as people do not feel aggrieved that government is taking advantage of their situation. We had one recent case in which a citizen of this country is saying that after 25 years, we're now getting some movement on a matter like this. And even the movement which is this belatedly is not appropriately what was anticipated. And all during that time, that individual is alleging that they have had to pay taxes to the government on property under the control of government for purposes pursued by the government 25 years ago. Compensation only now coming in 2020. That is entirely unacceptable. I know this Honourable Minister to be a man of action and a man of integrity, and I impress upon him to do his very best to persuade his colleagues, especially those who are responsible for finances, to ensure that people are properly compensated and that the authority of government with respect to these matters is not in any way abused. Minister gave several good reasons as to why these folks have to be moved from where they're currently located. One of them related to health. He expressed some particular concerns about the threat to their own health and to public health, and especially to the health of children. And if you're living on what was originally a landfill, which has not been properly or scientifically sealed or closed, and even in that instance where it has been, you're still exposed to all of those chemical negatives to which he, with his knowledge and research, has referred. And you're facing a serious situation. My question is, has any study, these people have been there for a while. Has any study been conducted, or has any study even been contemplated to test, to research whether or not there are any particular ailments, specific ailments emanating from the fact that these people have been living on this place on a dump, as was said, for such a long period of time? Because it's not sufficient to say that it is ill-advised to set up house on a dump because of the threat to your well-being, physical well-being. I think you have to go the next step. And if people have been there for a while, and in these numbers, as is being reported, then somebody has to check to see whether or not there are any particular public health problems which may already be in existence and associated with the fact that they are there. I think that is important. Health and well-being of the nation is something to which this government is giving some primary consideration and a focus of serious concern. And therefore, I just wonder whether or not any kind of investigation, scientific inquiry has been conducted to test whether or not there are any particular issues relative to public health which may already have arisen from the fact that they are there. The other reason the Honourable Minister gave, of course, is the threat to airport facilities and air travel, and this is understandable. And if you're responding to that, then it is very advisable that so you must, because you do not want to create a situation where any action resulting or any event taking place around the airport of a emergency nature is complicated or made worse because of the presence of persons living illegally within close precincts and proximity to the airport facility and to the movement of aircraft. So we support that. Do not think, however, that a government of this quality should leave it to an instance where pressures from outside regarding requirements for international standards being applied at your airport facility should be the thing that drives you to action. It can't be that everything we do simply because the international regulatory framework is such that if we don't, we suffer some detriment or penalty as a result of that. So I would like to know that the posture is more proactive than it is one which is responsive to any pressure coming as a result of requirements for acceptable air travel standards and airport standards in Barbados. But we support that reason. The other squatters in Barbados, and I can't sit down before I ask about them. And if the Honourable Member for St. Michael East were here sitting next to me, as he likes to do these days, I think he would want for me to raise that question as to what of the squatters at Bellevue. And that's a growing squatting community. You are the Honourable Representative, Mr. Speaker, for St. Michael Central. And you know that community is expanding even as we speak. And it's coming out of Bellevue, it is now encroaching upon almost Station Hill precincts. You have already lost a whole recreational space at Station Hill and Lower Waterford as a result of the expanding squatters community. So what are these folks? I've said before and I'd say it again, that I think squatting is not simply a manifestation of recklessness and disregard for law. It may be in some instances, but squatting is also a manifestation of a sense of dispossession and a sense of disenfranchisement by people who feel we can do no better. And we're left to this cause because the government is not in a position for various reasons to facilitate our aspirations, our hopes of owning our own property, of building a house, of constructing a dwelling. And so we feel that we must do something to take care of our families. And I believe squatting is not simply a reflection of disorderly behavior or illegal activity. It is a clear manifestation that people feel a sense of being dispossessed, a sense of being disenfranchised. And they're looking for help. They're looking for an option. They're looking for alternatives out of their particular situation of misery. Again, I say, I know this Honourable Minister to be a man of action, and that this squatting problem in Barbados will get his attention beyond Rock Hall or Gemswick or whatever is the proper name. And on behalf of yourself, sir, and on behalf of your member of St. Michael East, I ask humbly, but with confidence, that some attention be paid to the matter of squatting elsewhere, especially in places at Bellevue and Station Hill. And while he's at it, they want 2 areas in St. Michael West where there's small squatting, very small squatting communities. And if they can be helped, we very much would appreciate that as well. You're familiar with St. Michael West, Mr. Speaker, and want 2 little areas around the Bank Hall area and elsewhere where we have some small squatting settlements. And I simply ask that we recognize that people are saying we need some space, we need our own space, this is what we feel we must do. And in those instances, that a requisite response may be made with respect to that matter. The Honourable Minister, when he made his submission, also made reference to the fact that because this is a site formerly used as a dump, means that some of these buildings are constructed on very frail and fragile, vulnerable foundations. And I wonder, again, if any specific engineering study has been made to ascertain the level of threat, the level of danger that really exists. I say that, Mr. Speaker, with the incident at Arch Court, vividly in my mind, where we had a collapse of an apartment building and the death of family members in a cave, in a cavern at Arch Court. So when the minister says we've constructed houses at Rock Hall and Gemswick on a dump and the foundation is not good for such, and some of those dwellings are fairly sizable and of concrete, then does the government have any responsibility at all to do any kind of engineering study? There's one guy in Barbados who is very publicly offering his engineering skills to the whole of Barbados. And you might be able to make use of those skills in this particular context. And very seriously, to ascertain whether or not we are facing any kind of immediate threat which would result in loss of limb and life. Minister himself said the loss of one life is one too many, and I support that. But I support the acquisition with the knowledge I have of the situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable, can you turn off your microphone, please? Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This resolution, as a land resolution, housing resolution, effectively gives honourable members an opportunity to speak in terms of housing policy and social land policy and a bit about social policy, although I would not go as wide, Mr. Speaker, as has been done in previous debates. Land and housing has always been and will continue to be one of the primary challenges of a state, a developing small island state such as is our country. And our citizens, our constituents have legitimate rights for acquisition of land and housing. We know from early on that the ideal is, to acquire a piece of the rock within our country. And there's always tremendous pressure on the political leaders, the members of parliament to make available land and housing for our constituents. I dare say that most of us, if not all of us, would agree that employment, of course, in terms of jobs, just sustenance of our constituents and housing is one of the priorities as well, and one of the main requests we get from our constituents. The reality of the situation is that there is no government, there's no political administration that can fulfill the expectations, legitimate expectations of all of our people for acquisition of house and land. We have to, I suppose, do our best that we can do. I know that this political administration, sir, is trying its best. I mean, within, of course, the context of COVID. I know last year, I think it might have been around November, the Honourable Prime Minister would have led a forum at the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford, which many of us attended, sir, in terms of coming up with a new framework for construction of affordable houses in Barbados for our constituents, and a lot of the private sector and developers were there as well. I believe, sir, the Ministry of Housing is continuing with that and trying to get progression in place in terms of those affordable cost housing, what, $160,000, $180,000 maybe, whereby people can afford those houses. One of the problems, of course, we have those as a country and a society is access to financing, your purchase and acquisition of land and houses between the banking institutions, financial institutions, and credit unions. And that is key. I know, sir, again, that this administration is looking at that. I mean, I think that the high point of that came in the last administration of the Barbados Labour Party in the late 90s, early part of this century, when, ironically, sir, the immediate former Honourable Member for St. George North was Minister of Housing, and the Barbados mortgage finance portfolios was in place, because this would have been put there, sir, on the basic realization that a government, a political administration, and through its housing agency, the National Housing Corporation, cannot get anywhere in terms of fulfilling the legitimate desires of our citizens to own a house. And you have to have assistance in this regard from the private sector developers, and you have to be able to incentivize these developers, for example, and the people to be able to build affordable housing. So I look forward, sir, to that development again, government in association with the private sector in terms of supplying affordable housing to our people and access to the financing of it. One of the realities, sir, as we all know, sir, as representatives of the people, is that we have a policy, at least the banking institutions, in a large measure have a policy that they would not lend, or they will be extremely skeptical to lend long-term land and housing policy acquisition loans to people who are not appointed in their jobs, whether in terms of government sector and mainly that or private sector. And therefore the government's recent thrust to appoint over 3,000 public servants and make sure that those who were in temporary positions, their positions become permanent, they're appointed, is all tied in this regard, because those persons would now have greater power and leeway in going to financial institutions to acquire houses. One of the issues here, sir, is to determine exactly or roughly about how many persons in Barbados do really require housing and lands now and are asking for an opportunity to get them. I mean, when I was deputy chairman and acting chairman of the National Housing Corporation like 20 years ago, sir, I believe the list certainly was over 20,000 for persons who, over a period of time, would have enlisted with that corporation in terms of wishing access to purchase land or housing, or to rent land and housing. Some of those are obviously may have died, sir, would have died. Some would have acquired housing some other way, some would have emigrated, and therefore it is incumbent on the Ministry of Housing, National Housing Corporation, to try to obtain a rough figure on how many persons still require housing. The reality is that in any given year or so, maybe a government could realistically provide 1,000 housing solutions. I mean, even that may be stretching it. I know at one time, I believe under the last Barbados Labour Party administration, there was a time when you were aiming for about 2,500 housing solutions through government each year. That was never realized. It's virtually impossible, sir, for a state institution to do that. And we have to face this reality and engage with the private sector more. It could be a case, as I know was a concept in the last Barbados Labour Party administration, whereby permissions granted to property developers to develop land for housing purposes, or generally, for development, property development purposes, provision or as part of the condition, town planning application and permission would be that you had to identify particular areas within the development whereby lower income housing or middle income housing could also be obtained. And that is a concept that we may have to look at again, sir, as well. The issue, sir, of housing for persons with disabilities is obviously, sir, a challenge that any government such as this one, which is caring and which recognizes that a country is only as strong as its most vulnerable persons, has to engage in terms of thought process. Again, under the last Barbados Labour Party administration, we would have had white and then green papers on improving the lives of persons with disabilities, and those papers came up with a figure of about 10% of state housing for persons with disabilities. That has never been realized. That will always be a challenge, sir, as well. I know it happened in some areas, I believe, in where some of the state housing was reserved for persons with disabilities. That, of course, is connected to other social issues in terms of making jobs available for persons with disabilities, again, in terms tied in with their education and training, so that they can pay the necessary rent, even if it is subsidized a bit. But these are all issues, sir. I know that the main focus now is security of our people in a COVID environment, security in terms of health, the physical, in terms of the economic security. But these are all issues that we also have to look at in terms of the policy, housing policy of the ministry. We had moved to high-rise housing rather than single houses, obviously allowing for the creation of more space. And the minister could perhaps say whether that is still a policy of his ministry. I'm sure it probably is, because you get in more space, but also, of course, there are some who oppose that concept, or at least have doubts on it, because you don't want to create building blocks which house a lot of persons. It has to be tied in with an environmental thrust, green spaces thrust, which again, of course, this political administration is very keen to pursue. The Honourable Prime Minister spoke up to yesterday about the administration's intention to pursue Golden Square as a green space for the people of this country. So, sir, the housing and land acquisition and for our people and availability of it is clearly a tremendous social challenge. The state cannot provide all the needs, and I think the people of Barbados have to realize that. But government must do its best still to incentivize the private sector and property developers to join with us in allowing the creation of more land and housing solutions for our people. The banks, the financial institutions have to play a part in this. I know that the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, before he became Minister of Housing, has, in this same Parliament, sir, been very critical of those institutions in terms of their policies. It's a case where I suppose you have to work with them. I myself, sir, am not happy. Yes, I commend them for earlier this year agreeing with us, agreeing with this administration that they would waive payment of mortgages and payment of housing loans for a period of time. I don't know whether it was 3 months. I believe it was extended to 6 months in most cases. But then the banks still appear to want to add on interest onto those arrears of payments, which they had agreed to waive earlier on. I don't think that is right, sir. I know they will say that they've taken a cut in all the debt reprofiling that we have been through, sir. But the reality is that we all have to look out for each other, and it can't be a situation where capitalism or the corporate arm of society is greedy, because everybody has to be in this together. And a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and we have to look at how those who are struggling in terms of their employment and in terms of general day-to-day living because of COVID, sir, with the government doing the best it can do in all the circumstances, better than the vast majority of countries in the world. And the financial institutions have to, in my submission, come on board and see how they can assist in this regard. We've heard for a long time, sir, about reverse mortgages. That concept and philosophy has been an ideal, certainly, of this political party in past manifestos, sir. It is something that certainly I would like to see come to realization, and perhaps the Honourable Member for Christchurch West could speak in terms of where that may be at, because we know, sir, that there are a lot of older people in our country who are, as we call it, asset rich, but in terms of income or finances, they may be poor. And that this is certainly not a novel concept. This is a concept that has worked in many other countries in the world, and it is something that the financial institutions of this country need to be able to get on board with, so that our senior citizens, our elderly population, who obviously are some of our most vulnerable, subject to health challenges and physical and other disabilities, can very well benefit from. So I know that, I believe the Barbados Association for Retired Persons has also spoken in terms of that philosophy and that policy. This government, sir, has to be commended for earlier this term reducing the ultimate rate of land taxes for those who are most vulnerable, those who own properties below $800,000 in value, sir. I know that those above that rate, sir, have had to pay a great increase in land taxes, but that is, a substantial increase in land taxes, but that, sir, is social policy. And it will not always be so, sir. But the reality of the situation is that those who could least afford that their rate and the quantum of land taxes came down. And obviously, sir, the municipal solid waste tax, this government has opposition marched against that and would have been primary. I think the trade unions, I believe, marched as well in that, would have been primary responsible for the reversal of that regressive policy by the last government in terms of taxes on land. We have a responsibility as a government, sir, to try to keep housing prices down. I think we have been able to manage that as best as we can in a situation where we don't have controls, actual legislative controls on housing or on rents. We allow market forces to operate, but this clearly is an issue that a political administration must be aware of. Finally, sir, in terms, of course, this is a compulsory acquisition resolution. I agree, certainly, sir, with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who spoke in terms of compensation for persons whose property is acquired. It is something, sir, that I've spoken of, certainly as an opposition member, the need for adequate and speedy compensation for persons whose property is acquired under the Land Acquisition Act for public purposes, sir, as is allowed. It is an act that I believe came into effect in the mid-60s, around our independence, maybe just before or just after. It is a fundamental act, one that has to be there on our statute books, giving a political administration that authority. But the reality is, sir, that yes, both political parties that have formed the government since adult suffrage, since independence in this country, have not been as diligent as we ought to have been in granting compensation to persons whose properties have been acquired. I'm aware, sir, that I'm not so sure of the figure, the amount owed at present, but I know that this government has been making serious attempts to reduce the amount of monies owed to persons for their compulsory acquisition of their property, sir, as we ought to. The BRET program, of course, speaks towards payment of debt owed by government to its citizens, and I know that progress is being made in that regard to reduce that financial obligation of the political administration towards its people and its citizens. These are just some areas which we face as a government in terms of challenges, but certainly I would support the resolution, any resolution such as this, which advances the land and housing solutions of our people, which, as I've said, is one of the primary challenges facing any government of this country. And the public could be assured that while this government, as any government, will not be able to fulfill as many housing solutions for our people as we would like in the real world, we will continue to do our best. The reality of the situation, sir, is that even those countries such as those in Scandinavia, Sweden, and those others that have recognizably the most outstanding social policies in the world, those countries have not been able, by a long stretch, to provide affordable housing to the majority of their people and housing solutions. They've done better than other developed countries in that regard, but still they have not been able as a state to do that. And they've been able to join in the case of Sweden, for example, with private property developers and have programs where the private property developers have been involved in such, which is something, as I said, that this administration is doing. Yeah, I know. So we will, as I said, continue to do our best in terms of compulsory acquisition and provision of housing solutions for persons such as those in this case who have to be recited. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm obliged to the Honourable Member for speaking so widely on the issue of social policy as it relates to housing solutions. I won't have to go there, but I wish to center my comments around the public purpose for which the resolution is being pursued, namely the purpose of enhancing public safety and national security. As the resolution was being presented to this honorable chamber by the honorable member for Christchurch West, I took note of the fact that there was significant emphasis being given to the risk associated with where people are currently located and the need, therefore, to mitigate against those risks. I took note of the need to protect our people. And it is in taking note of the tremendous risk associated with having people live on a dump site or near a dump that I could not help but relate it to the issue that some others are experiencing, very similar issues that some others are experiencing. And I speak of the situation where there are residents in another area, members of our community, of our country in another area, living very close to a dump site, where the characteristics and the risks imposed are very similar, and where residents are being caused significant unease. Unease not only because of the smell, but because of everything that we are discussing here this morning and that the resolution seeks to address, the risk to the health of a community. I could not help but take note of the passion as expressed and the concern if one person, imagine the cost if one person dies, and the cost of people therefore suffering acute medical conditions as a consequence of where they live. And I therefore could not help but to utilize this opportunity for us to give attention not only therefore to the residents at Rock Hall that the resolution addresses, but also the residents at Laura State, where the conditions almost mirror directly a number of the conditions that we're seeking to address here. And whilst the issue of land acquisition or compulsory land acquisition may not always be practicable to address the concerns that we have or to address the solutions that will have to be put in place, what it signals is the need for very careful and deliberate and strategic and unhesitant action to address these concerns before they get out of hand and before they get to the point where compulsory acquisition and relocation of residents may have to become necessary. And the concerns that would give that the residents of Rock Hall or the squatters at Rock Hall, if we would rather, may have relating to health are very much the concerns that will be present in other areas. I speak of concerns from people who have asthma and other respiratory issues, people who would have concerns with how the conditions around them, not imposed by them, are impacting their skin and their health generally. And as I rise to support this resolution, I am mindful of the fact that every single life matters and every single person matters. I know that there was mention being made of squatting and how it is expanded in a number of different areas. I don't think that this is only an urban phenomenon, Mr. Speaker. I think that squatting and the need for housing solution is a national phenomenon. And the conditions, therefore, that give rise to this resolution are not conditions that anyone should recognize as being unique to the Rock Hall area as far as housing solutions, but as far as the health and safety of residents. And so I support the resolution on that ground. I also recognize the need for responsibility in making citizens and residents more comfortable in their space. And whilst this resolution addresses public safety, within the realm of public safety, I think consideration can also be given to the conditions that many would have to endure in situations where they are on Zone 1, located in Zone 1 areas. And therefore, the need and responsibility of a government to address these concerns or to position these concerns that individuals will have within their housing solutions. I speak specifically when I make mention of people who are living on Zone 1, there is the natural consequence that people will end up using pit toilets. Because if they're in a Zone 1 area, there's all the implications of contamination of the water and so on, and then the sewage issues that pertain that will inhibit or prohibit, rather, individuals from being able to have some of the basic amenities that many of us are able to enjoy. And in speaking to that as a cause for relocation, I could not help, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch West was making the presentation on the resolution, to think of the need for relocating some other members, residents, not only because it is a public safety, but it is a health and safety concern of individuals and their families living in a particular area. And I cast my mind very easily to previous acquisitions, such as the acquisition at Hamlin, an acquisition that was made not only to facilitate housing, but to relocate individuals so that they can enjoy conditions that are safer and are therefore more healthy conditions to live in and to raise a family within. I also think of that relocation because it was one that would permit for road improvement to address road safety concerns as well. And in speaking of that and recognizing that, I have to venture into an examination of why it takes us as long as it does, having acquired pieces of land, to make the necessary payments for it and to pursue the objectives as outlined in the Hamlin case, the Hamlin land case of housing and relocation. Because I easily asked this chamber to recall that these were lands that were acquired from as far back as 2002, almost 2 decades ago. And we still have a situation where residents are uncomfortably living in Zone 1 areas where they not only have to be using pit toilets, but have to be drawing water from a standpipe up a hill to their houses on a daily basis. And therefore, where the health concerns of these residents are significantly compromised. So as I conclude my statement before this House in support of the resolution before it, I urge us to reflect on the fact that yes, every single life matters. I urge us to reflect on the fact that we need to protect our people. I urge us to reflect on the fact that if one person dies or if one person is injured, that's a cost that no one of us will want to carry for ourselves. And as we support this resolution, it's not one that will cause any divide or should not cause any divide by us, because the objectives that are being pursued ought to be very clear to all of us. But as we pursue this, it is for us to be conscious that this is but one of many areas of concern that would need to be addressed. And not only the areas that I mentioned, but as we go around this country, the evidence of squatting and the consequences of squatting are consequences that none of us, I'm sure, are blind to, and that all of us should see the need to pursue the solutions that would counteract the risk that a number of people and their families, particularly children, are coming up against. So I just thought I would add my 2 cents on this first occasion that I have to speak on a land acquisition issue in this House, to highlight that the issues that concern us in this resolution are far-reaching across this country, and a number of these issues are already issues within our attention that have been brought to national attention, and to urge similar support as we move very swiftly towards solutions to ameliorate and address these very vexing issues for our people. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, let me say it is a great pleasure and an honor of mine to be able to follow the new member for St. George North on her maiden speech. And I am sure that she will make many, many wonderful contributions to this honorable chamber. Let me first start with the acquisitions that the member for the Leader of Opposition spoke about. Yes, acquisitions are a problem. Both administrations in the past are guilty of acquiring people's land and taking a long time to pay. In fact, one of the chief agencies that has contributed to that problem is the ministry that I used to be the minister of, the Ministry of Transport Works and Maintenance, that acquired lands for road improvements and so on and so forth. But let me tell you that we are working to get that matter addressed. And I cannot suppose what Cabinet will do, but certainly in the ministry, we are putting things together to get that matter of all of those land acquisitions over the years addressed as quickly as possible. The honourable member also talked about, in particular, I guess he was mentioning Lake Rich Village and the Bell and those sorts of areas. And I also work with the Cabinet Subcommittee on the Sewerage System, formerly with the former member for Christchurch East, now with the member for the current Minister of Transport Works and Maintenance. And I can tell you that we are very advanced as well in putting together a plan and hopefully executing that plan very quickly for a sewer system, be it by reverse osmosis or however we decide to do it, for sewering that area of the Bell. So it is garnering the attention of the government, and we are looking to get that matter resolved, the matter that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition spoke about. The Honourable Member also spoke about studies being done. Well, I can tell the Honourable Member very clearly, we don't need, as much as I do appreciate that having scientific and empirical evidence with T testing and hypothesis testing of T's and so on is important. I am not aware of any clinical studies like that were done, but I know from all the other evidence that you do not want people living in close proximity or on a landfill. I give you health studies related to landfill gas exposure. That is one. Science Daily, living near a landfill can damage your health. Health and environmental risks of residents living close to a landfill, environmental research and public health research. Of course,
I remember you're going to make them documents to the
that's why
House.
I'm making them here, all of them here. And the dangers of methane gas poisoning and exposure. All of these studies show very clearly you do not want a person living on a landfill because of all of the problems associated with that and all of the studies associated. Further, this actually, the proximity to the asbestos dump, which is right next door, which gives rise to mesothelioma, is another reason why we don't want that at all. With respect to the Honourable Member for St. James North, the database cleanup that the member spoke of, we're actively pursuing that in terms of people being called, and you may have seen the public service announcements. The National Housing Corporation has engaged, I think it is 5 young people that are calling people to make sure those who have found a housing solution, those who have not, who are still pursuing, who've passed away, and cleaning that whole database so that we're well aware as to exactly who needs, who doesn't need, and where we are with respect to who is on the database. These houses that are there, Mr. Speaker, were built without planning permission. So a lot of them don't have running water, don't have, and that is a big problem in a COVID environment, you would appreciate, don't have electricity, don't have a proper sewage system, and don't have, no roads, no foundations, nothing at all. So it's a significant problem, and it needs cleaning up. And we are absolutely focused and determined to get this cleanup done. I could inform the Honourable Chamber that we've in fact already built a prototype. I'm just waiting for the Honourable Prime Minister to come and visit and give her approval, fingers crossed. And once she gives her approval, I am well prepared and ready to start building out those houses, to get those people relocated, and to get this whole area cleaned up as quickly as possible. It is, thank you, Honourable Members. It has been going on for too long, decades. And now is the time. Now is the time to take this, face the problem, as the former Prime Minister would have said, face the problem and fix the problem. I am convinced we now have a solution. We have the places to position the people. We have the capability, we have the ability, we have the technology, and all we have to do now is execute. Honourable members, I would ask that this resolution do now pass.
The questions that this resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Number 3, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of sums of money for the service of this item. Oh, yeah, sorry. Sir, before we do that, we to revert to government notices to give notice of that said resolution.
Correct. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $49,865,928 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020-2021 as shown in Supplementary Estimates number 7, 2020-2021.
Revert to government business, sir. Order number 3. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of money for the service of this item.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
I beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair. The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of $49,865,928 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020 to 2021 as shown in the Supplementary Estimates number 7, 2020 to 2021, which form the schedule to the resolution. Head 13, Prime Minister's Office, in the amount of $22,500,000.
Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I do not intend to detain you long, but the matters that are before this Honourable Chamber for supplementing the resources of the various programs in the Prime Minister's office are largely as a result of COVID in the first instance. On the 20th of March 2020, I stood here and announced as we closed off the estimates an amount of money for the Adopt a Family program. We knew that we would need to be able to significantly supplement the resources of a number of persons across our country as a result of them not working or in some instances having lost their jobs, persons in their families rather having lost their jobs. Many of them were required to rely on welfare and we realized that we needed to have a program that put together funds from both the public and private sources in order to ensure that Barbadians could keep their heads above water. 2020 has not been easy. In many other parts of the world and in various media, it has been described in all kinds of ways, too varied and some too inappropriate for me to use in the language in the Honourable Chamber of Parliament. But suffice it to say that it has been difficult. We have already been told that there were over 75,000 claims on unemployment benefit, 30-something thousand people, but the actual number of claims would have represented multiple claims for some persons. Some were fortunate and only were there during the period of lockdown. There are others who, however, whose families continue to be under tremendous pressure. And I want first and foremost to thank ordinary Barbadians who donated over $1 million to supplement what the government had put on the table. I want equally to thank those charitable trusts across the nation who have made a difference over the course of the last 15 years in particular, when the specter of charitable and philanthropic institutions have truly stepped up to the plate to close the gap in Barbados. And there are a number of charities with which we are now all familiar because they have literally helped so many hundreds of families across this nation. And I refer to the Barbados Children's Trust, the Sandy Lane Trust, the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, just to name a few, the Eden Lodge Trust, Charitable Trust, just to name a few. And these charitable entities have added to the effort of the government in trying to keep people's heads above water. When I first spoke, I made the point that the most important thing is for people to be standing in 2021, 1 year from when I spoke in March. The majority of persons are standing. In this battle against COVID, we have lost 7 Barbadians. In the last debate, we spoke about 1 loss being too many. It is equally too many with respect to this pandemic. But it isn't only those who succumb ultimately to the pandemic that we are concerned about. It is also those whose circumstances have been severely impacted as a result of the pandemic. Not necessarily from a public health perspective, but entities or people that they may have been relying on are no longer in a position to be able to assist some of the families that are there. There are persons who may have been working as gardeners. There are persons who may have been working as around persons' households. There are persons who may have been working as seamstresses. There are all kinds of professions. There are farmers who may have had secure markets before, but who, because of the reduction in the number of visitors coming to the country, have not been able to supply their goods and produce in the same way as they were before because of the diminution in demand as a result of the reduction in travel numbers to Barbados. So we find ourselves having, as a government, to deal with 2 conditions. One, an implosion of the private economy that has taken place, largely driven by the massive impact on the tourism sector.